Welcome to Kind Animal Services. My name is Kelsey, and in this video I want to talk about harness fitting because this is a critical piece, and I want to talk a little bit about getting your dog fitted, into an appropriate fitted harness, but also about the different kinds of harnesses. Now I'm only going to review two different sort of styles because most harnesses are going to fall into these two different categories, but that doesn't mean that these are the only harnesses or the only brands that you're going to find. So you want to try to find something that is similar to the harnesses I'm going to show you in this video. So let's dive into and use, this is Posey, introduce Posey to you. Posey is the perfect dog. She doesn't bark, she doesn't run away, she's a perfect dog. So a couple of things I want to point out here on Posey. And because she's black, I'm going to use a little bit of white tape to demonstrate for you. So this is the back side of Posey's rib cage, and I want to point that out because as we're fitting harnesses, it's important to note, this is probably like her last rib is about right here, and that's that, divot, and then she's going to have a bit of an hourglass or indent here. You can also notice it from this side. A lot of dogs, especially those deep-chested, barrel-chested type dogs, you're going to see that tuck up right about there at the end of their rib cage. So that's about the edge of her rib cage. Another point I want to put is I like to put a little dot, find the shoulder, right at the joint of the shoulder. Now this needs to be considered because all harnesses, obviously, we're harnessing the front half of the dog. We don't typically fit harnesses around the rear, with the exception of some like physical therapy type harnesses, but generally we're going to be fitting harnesses around to the front and the chest. So we need to kind of mark out that. Understanding where your dog's point of their shoulder is really important. Now this is where their shoulder is going to move forward and backwards. Right here, which is where the shoulder is going to, you kind of can't see it because of the fabric, but where the shoulder, when it rotates or rolls back, the shoulder blade will pull back right in here. So this is a pinch spot for a lot of harnesses, and you want to be careful of that area. Another one is going to be kind of here. Let's go this way. This and this are pinch spots. This is a movement joint or joint spot, so this is where the shoulder is going to move, and this is going to be a pinch spot and a pinch spot, and then we have the back side of the rib cage. So why is this important? When we are fitting harnesses, we really, really, really want to make sure that our harnesses do not restrict our dog's movement. Harnesses are not designed, some harnesses are designed to intentionally restrict shoulder motion, and that restriction will cause the dog to slow down or pull less on a leash. So we'll get some results in that way. But they can also do lasting damage to the shoulder, especially when we're using them on puppies. So especially when these dogs are growing, mature adult dogs, it's not as big of a deal when we're using those types of no-pull harnesses are often ones that are going to restrict shoulder motion. So they're going to potentially pinch in this area, and they're definitely going to cause some pinching in the front area in order for the shoulder to not move forward at its full reach. So you really want to be careful that when you're fitting your harness, you really want to make sure that your shoulders are free for movement and they can fully reach and extend forward, and if they pulled back, they're not going to get pinched. One more point I want to put on the dog is just a dot right here. This is called the withers. This is the point at which the shoulder blades meet, and it's another point in which some harnesses will cause some pinching or tension here. You really want to be careful. I try to make sure that this is still part of the shoulder and that this area is free for movement as well. The first harness I want to show is a really, really, really popular harness, and it kind of goes against all these points that I've put on the dog. This is called, I think, an Easy Walk. Yeah, this is an Easy Walk. There's a couple other brands that are going to look like this. So don't get hung up on the brands. This video is really to help you fit your dog. I'm actually going to fit it upside down. So again, don't stress, okay? This isn't about it. So if we put this on the dog, if you are going to use this style of harness, I'm really bad, I don't know, we call them Y harnesses or H harnesses or whatever. This, I would say, is like an over the head. It's kind of a collar that clips around behind the shoulders. I don't know if that helps at all, but it does have a clip on the front, but it's kind of like a collar. It sits around the neck, at the base of the neck. I usually call this the collar piece, and then it just has one single strap that basically hugs the shoulders. So look at this. The restriction of movement is absolutely outrageous. And this has no leash tension on it at this point. So this is just to look at. So if I were to get that lined up right. It covers all those things. So this point right here, if the dog were to rotate its shoulder back, this piece is pulling forward on the shoulder. So it's going to restrict motion reaching back and it's going to pinch right here. With leash pressure, it gets even worse. And then it also, I have this one fitted what I would say correctly. If I was going to fit one of these to a dog or have a dog wear one of these, doesn't mean I don't ever use them. I just use them with caution and know their weaknesses. But ideally, if you were going to use one of these, you want these circle rings to be as far back as possible, and you want this piece to sit up high. And what ends up happening most of the time with these is this is actually how this harness tends to fit. Once we've added motion and we go for a walk, the harness starts to dangle down around here. Now look what's happened. We have restricted motion. So if the harness stays nice high up on the neck, then this shoulder would be free. But what's going to happen with this type of a harness is it's not. The dog's going to start moving, this is going to start wiggling, and it's going to work its way right down here, and we're going to pinch the shoulder. So now the shoulder can't move back, nor can it move forward. The other piece that I don't like about these, maybe I should rotate this, hold on. I'm not concerned about that part of it. So, and you can put them on in multiple ways. The other piece that I don't love is this. So if you can see again on the top where I was telling you the withers, basically it's the top point of the shoulder blades where the shoulder blades kind of come together. If you were to pull your shoulder blades back in that point where they kind of meet, that's this point right here. This harness and others like it, some have a ring here that you can attach your leash here at this point, and it attaches right to the top of those withers. When you put leash tension on that, it's going to restrict the shoulders even more. Do you see what it just did? It pulled up on both the back side of the shoulder, the front side of the shoulder, and we're pinching those shoulder blades together. I don't like anything that's going to put pressure right here. This is true with saddle fitting as well. We don't want anything touching this entire area of a horse when we're saddle fitting or in a harness. So I really strongly suggest that you find a better fitted harness. I would say this is an ill-fitted harness. It's better than nothing in most cases, but it is an ill-fitting harness. So let me show you the type of or shape of harness that I prefer on a dog. All right, so this one I think people call a Y-shaped harness, and really what we're looking at here is we're looking at the shape of the harness. There are many brands out there. This happens to be a balance harness. We have these for sale in our inventory, so if you come into class, you're welcome to buy one of these. I love these because I think that they're the most versatile and they fit pretty much all dogs. They are completely adjustable, but there are other brands that are going to have the same shape, so this is what you're looking for when you're fitting even those other brands. One thing you're going to notice is that this has a true collar piece. This is going to go around the collar piece of the dog, separate from the rib cage piece. So there's a strap here, the rib cage piece, and we have a collar piece. They're two completely separate pieces. So that's the first thing I recommend that you look for when you're fitting a harness. You want two separate pieces. So it creates this, if I were to lay this flat on a table, I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of an H shape. So I think some people call this an H harness. It also, I think, is also called a Y-shaped harness. Why? Because it creates a Y right here in the front. This is my most ideal harness type. Usually with this type of a harness, you're going to have a bar that goes and attaches the collar to the rib cage, and one that usually is going to attach to the bottom. I think there are some brands that don't have a bottom bar that doesn't hold that in place, but they also have like usually some strapping here. So I'm not saying those are good or bad. I don't see them very often. I think I've seen one ever, but it has an additional strap that runs here, so it's like 3 pieces. Those could be okay if well fitted, just looking to make sure that you're not restricting any motion and the shoulder's natural gait. So, a couple things that I want to see. I want to see at least 2 fingers, but even 3 behind the rib cage. So that pinch point, if we take our fingers and put it right at that pinch point, this bar sits behind that. It should not sit past the rib cage. So you don't want the harness to sit beyond into the soft point of the rib cage. So that last rib there, it does not pass the last rib. It's still sitting on the rib cage, but far enough behind here that this shoulder can move forward and backwards without restriction from this piece. I'm actually loosening this, so this is a mistake that people make with this particular type of harness. Once pressure is applied here, if this piece is sitting too tight, it will kind of cut up into the dog's neck, and then it basically acts like a collar, and so that kind of defeats the purpose of a harness, is that you're choking your dog. So in order to not let that happen, you want to make sure that this neck piece is not fitted tight. This should be nice and loosey-goosey. If you were to think the dog puts its head down to the ground, there should be a gap here so that if the dog puts its head down, the harness does not pull forward. So if that dog went to put its head down, it's going to be able to reach the floor and the ground and sniff things, and this harness is not going to shift much. If this is nice and too tight, I'll just kind of cinch it up and see what happens. If you cinch this up and the dog were to put, this dog's a bad example, if the dog were to put its head down, a lot of times you'll see this whole part of the harness go like that. If that happens, then your neck collar piece is probably too tight. So when you're fitting a harness appropriately, make sure that the neck collar piece does not restrict head motion. So that's also important in your harness, is that this is loose enough that the dog has full range of head motion, can put their head down without shifting the harness a lot. It might shift some because harnesses move on the dog when the dog moves. Why is this harness, or what to look for in your harness when you're shopping? So this is the style and shape that I prefer. This is the style and shape that I'm going to recommend. This particular harness is probably one of the most versatile harnesses I've seen, in that it fits every dog, but also something to kind of think about is the more attachment points that you have on your harness, the better. So this one has 2. Typically you're going to have 2. It has a D-ring in the front and a D-ring in the back. So that allows you to pull the dog around in both ways. When you attach to both, it's going to help balance the dog's weight as well as balance the harness from getting rotated. So if you just attach to the front, what ends up happening is this. And if you can see that, this bar here becomes a shoulder restrictor. But as soon as pressure is released from that, the harness wiggles itself back like that. So it may slip, and that's okay. I don't mind if the harness slips a little, as long as the harness itself, when shifting and moving, will find itself a happy little spot that's not going to restrict shoulder motion. So this is one reason why this harness is kind of handy for like reactive dogs and allows maximum control, is because when you do attach to the front and the back, you're going to be able to steer your dog much like you have horse reins in your hand. You can steer them kind of left and right. Keep that harness balanced and appropriately adjusted on them. And yeah, it really allows you to just turn your dog around. So that's just kind of an extra bit. If it only has a back attachment, A-okay in most circumstances. I will say in our reactive dog class, we do recommend that you have at least an option for a front clip. The reason is you're going to have a lot more control should the dog lunge forward, and you can prevent a bite if you have a front attachment. So I prefer having both. When I'm dealing with a reactive dog or a dog I'm worried about, I clip to both. But at minimum in our reactive dog class, we do kind of require that you have a front attachment harness. Personally, when I'm just walking, even reactive dogs or any dogs, for the most part, I primarily use the back clip. So if your harness only has a back clip, for most things, you're going to be just fine. But if you want the most versatility and the most control in your training, while you're training, as kind of a management tool, say you have an obnoxious puppy that's dragging you down the road, you may still want that front attachment option. And I like to remind people, please don't get attached to one placement or another with your leash. Be creative. I am constantly changing where I put my leash. I might leash it to the back, I might leash it to the front, I might leash it to both. Sometimes I've even used this triangle ring right here and attached right here because then it acts like a collar. I rarely do that, but it is an option. Don't get or feel like there's only one way to walk in a harness. And the more versatile harness that you get, that is a well-fitted harness, following these kind of rules, the better success you're going to have, the better control you're going to have is really what it is. A harness doesn't train a dog. It doesn't teach a dog to pull. It doesn't teach a dog to walk on a leash. It's just simply a safety tool. So it's a safety tool for the dog, and it keeps the dog safe is really why most people are going to recommend harnesses, why we recommend harnesses, because a collar runs the risk of causing damage to the neck. Inappropriate collar corrections, harnesses kind of mitigate that problem, lessen those corrections, and helps the client and the human end of the leash slowly learn to teach in a different style while keeping the dog safe. To reiterate, when fitting a harness, a couple things to look for. Making sure that there's enough room in the collar piece so that the dog has full range of its head. They can drop their head without pulling on the harness too much. That there's about 2 to 3 fingers behind the shoulder so that the shoulder is not pinched and there's not a raw spot that's going to get rubbed from the harness being right here. The other thing is that there is no bar or strap that is going to restrict forward motion of the shoulder, so the shoulder is free to move forward, which is why that Y shape in the front, what that Y shape in the front is going to allow. The point comes to here instead of across the chest, and that's about it. Oh, and not to let the harness pass the rib cage. So don't let it sit too far back, and avoiding any pinching action that might happen up here, which is another reason why I like the back piece of the harness or rib cage or girth piece of the harness to sit further back and closer to that back rib cage or back rib, because then that piece is not sitting here and your motion is not coming from the shoulder area. It's coming from back, kind of in the middle of the dog, if you will. Go out, find yourself a great harness. If you need a harness, Kind Animal Services can supply you with a harness. We have plenty for sale. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.